Welcome to Utah Stories. So, as everyone is aware, local journalism has been slowly dying for years now. I was hearing it 20 years ago when I was in journalism school that newspapers are dying and journalism is dying. There's got to be a way in which we can cover the important local news and report on the facts and the things that matter, because without an informed population of residents, of citizens, then corrupt leaders can get away with, as we know, all sorts of horrible things. And we've covered on this on our outlet the Gondola Project up Little Cottonwood Canyon, where it appears 90% of the voters don't want it, but they're building it anyway because they apparently can do that. And we've covered how the millions of dollars have been wasted in homelessness spending, and with very little to no accountability. But I have on the program with me today a guy who has been in the newspaper business for pretty much his entire career, has worked for over 4 newspapers. He's been the publisher of most of the biggest newspapers in Utah, except the Deseret News and Salt Lake Tribune. His name is Rhett Long. Thanks for joining me, Rhett.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, so I didn't know who you were, but then I looked up how long you've been doing what you're doing and all the years that you've been in the business. How would you describe the massive changes in how things were being published and reported on, say, 30, 40 years ago compared to how they're being reported on and disseminated today?
Well,
I'll just have you put this up.
When I first got into the newspaper business, we were about the depth of the newspaper, being able to do multi-part stories. If it took a week to get the story right, it took a week. If it took a month, you put a month into it because you were going to have something that people needed to know. Today, what's really happened, really since 2008, is when we really saw the big decline. When the bubble burst, the economy killed the newspapers at that point. They lost a lot of advertisers. Matter of fact, in some cases, 50% of their advertising revenue disappeared. So what happened was you saw all of those tenured legacy writers that did all of that work. They were making too much money. The newspapers couldn't pay them. They cut them loose. They could go hire somebody right out of journalism school for pennies on the dollar, and that's what they did. And so immediately the publishers and the editors were working kind of against each other. Editors wanted to tell the story. Publishers couldn't afford it. So they started cutting. And unfortunately, newspapers lost their reputation of being a quality product, something that could be trusted. So, as I look back at the times that I've been the publisher, we really worked hard at trying to make sure we could still pick some good stories and get to the bottom of it and deliver it. And so I'm proud of the work that my team did, but was it the best we could do? No. We scratched the surface just because we didn't have enough. I mean, today, these poor journalists, they'll get assigned 10, 12, 14 stories a week. Sometimes they're the only journalist in the newsroom. I mean, pick up a newspaper on Monday or Tuesday, and the byline will be two people. That's all the stories are produced by 2 writers. That's it. Sports was always a big thing. Wanted to be able to cover all of the high school sports, and that always stayed important to me. I wanted to see, local kids doing good, and grandparents and parents wanting to buy that, because I could still sell single copy if I had the right information in there. May not sell me a subscription, but it'll keep a subscription. So it just became this real balancing act of trying to have enough content and still be able to produce a newspaper that somebody wanted.
Yeah, and so for those of you who are new to the industry, the editor decides what stories are going to run and what the editorial direction is of the paper, but the publisher is in charge of the revenue side of things. How do we keep the content in there that's going to drive subscriptions, drive advertising? Did you find that you butted heads a lot with the editors?
No, I was lucky. I had editors both in St. George and in Provo that were firm believers in the content that they wanted to be able to produce. The firm believers. But they understood when we started to look at sections of the newspaper, because the great thing about digital that came to our newspaper, we could see what news people were reading.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could track that. I always look at, I think back of all the arguments I got in with at the time, Dixie State. And they would be so mad at me because I'd do stories on SUU gymnastics, for example, and we wouldn't cover the football team at Dixie State. And it was because the clicks weren't there. We could see what was really important.
The clicks weren't there for the football team?
For the football team.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I could go in and show them, and it would just frustrate them, and they wouldn't believe me, But that really helped us to change how we were going to spend the money that we did have, because we really found out that, if we talked about blue sky, people cared about, everybody likes a blue sky. Everybody likes to know that people are doing something to keep the skies blue. But you start to talk about green, and it's a whole different story, because you get on different sides of, you're killing a couple of industries if you're going to go this way. So it's really interesting.
That's in conservative Utah County.
Exactly.
You don't want to call it a green energy initiative, or
yeah. Or it's been very interesting to be a publisher throughout the state. I've really enjoyed it. Got to Ogden, and I would say that it was a real change. You get Provo and Washington County, or Utah County and Washington County are as red as it can get. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's face it. There's no redder area. Iron County is the same way. And then you get up to Weber County, and now I know why Weber State's purple, because there's a lot of blue and a lot of red up there, and it's a very diverse community, and I enjoyed that after fighting so hard. With trying to tell the story of the LGBTQ, and it was just one of those things where
you had to fight to tell that story.
You did, because it wasn't something that was accepted in Utah County and Washington County.
You just didn't report on it.
Well, we did, but you did a lot of it online, or page 3. That was where, if there was ever a pushback between editorial and publisher. Mm-hmm. Go ahead and write it. I'm not going to tell you what to write, but I can tell you where I'm going to put it in the newspaper. Yeah. So that was one of the things that...
So when you say you would look at the clicks and you would look at the traffic to kind of determine what you should cover, is that a conversation you'd have with the editor? And the editor would say, but we got to report on the city council meetings, and we got to report on the state legislature, because it's so important that people know what's going on. Or was it you would be able to convince the editor that, but we got to cover what people want to look at?
She was the one producing the information for me.
Yeah.
In this case, or he was. So
so you were determining what.
So I was going, okay, I want to see a full report. So we started sitting down and looking at the reports that needed to be developed, and then they were brought forward. And I'm sure that that's the same in all the other newspapers around. I know it was throughout Gannett. When I worked for Gannett newspapers, the whole thing is we were always looking at the analytics, analytics. So it was no different other than when you go to work for a company like the Nuttings newspapers. They had bought the Daily Herald and the Standard Examiner. It was a completely different animal, because they are a private company. They have firm beliefs in a lot of things, and it made it hard for you to cross that line of
Nuttings papers.
They own the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I think 60 other newspapers around the country.
I worked for Times Mirror for a little while, and they owned a bunch of papers. And
but
I try to understand that, because we always run into the problem that I would actually like to cover more of what's going on in the state legislature, the city councils, the community councils, but when you do examine it from a click rate, if you were to just cover the 5 best cat videos on the internet, that's going to get more clicks. And then it's just kind of a race to the bottom, the lowest common denominator for the least amount of work. How do you not get your newsroom to become that? Like, you're just reporting on the most popular YouTube videos because that's what people want to click on.
It's very true. And working with USA Today for as long as I did, you could take stories that they had covered, kind of like the best thing I've seen on the internet today, and you could blow it up with just serving that on your servers to your readers. So that's not what people are paying you to be a publisher for. But I can tell you, the whole thing about newspapers dying. There are more readers of the newspaper content today than ever before because it's digital. Those who have locked down or give you 7 clicks or 5 stories before they shut you down, I believe are missing the boat. That, unfortunately, they're the ones that started it. It was only the Wall Street Times that got it day one, said, we're charging. You want to come see it? Still,
Wall Street Journal.
You're going to pay for it.
Oh, Wall Street Journal and New York Times.
Yeah,
both.
And so the whole thing, public content was created by an accident by the newspapers. And so they wanted those eyeballs. When they found out how powerful digital was going to be and social media was going to be, they couldn't, they were just, it was greed. It was like, oh, give me all the clicks I can get, give me all the eyeballs I can get. And what happened is they found out that by having a print product, that the digital revenue was good, but it wasn't good enough to pay for a newspaper staff. It wasn't good enough.
We found that too.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so we all went through it. Every newspaper company went through this mistake. And I was on the digital side at the time, and I kept saying, you guys are making a huge mistake. You're making a huge mistake. Don't do this.
So you think everything should have been paywalled right from the get-go?
From the get-go. Or now you've got to let it go and see how much revenue you can actually produce. Because, whether you're going to be a weekly newspaper, because the dailies are, it's looking like you might get one a weekend edition or something. I am proud of what they've done at the Tribune. I think they have fought hard to find a model, and it's working.
Yeah.
And it really is.
So the big question is, how do you achieve this balance between journalistic integrity, reporting on the subjects and issues that really matter, investigative journalism, but also driving enough traffic and eyeballs and ad revenue to make the paper successful? How do you find that balance?
If you give me that answer, I'll be a very rich man. Having fought that battle, there's a line that the investment of the product has to become more important than the bottom line. And until we have owners like the Huntsmans, where, writing a check for $400,000 a month because their newspaper was losing money, and coming up with a model that actually worked. And, that's what newspapers are kind of faced with. What do you do? And I believe what we're doing right here is really going to be the next step, because the investment into storytelling is going to happen one way or the other, but it's who's going to do it right and be able to carry that. And I think that's really the thing that I've been waiting and watching, is to see what's going to happen, because I do love my Datelines. I like to watch those shows because they do put the time in, and they still do investigative.
You see it on a national scale
and
with big outlets, but unfortunately local, as we're going to talk about in the next segment, local journalism is really suffering. And we have to take a little break, and we have to put that in our next segment, so stay tuned to watch that. So we're going to take a little break. When we come back, again, more with Rhett Long about how local journalism is really suffering and what could be done to, especially local television news, bring back more integrity and truth and fact-finding. So we'll be back. We'll be right back.